First Contact's Fatal Assumption. High Admiral Vexthor of the Neuraxian Empire stood before the holographic display, his crystalline exoskeleton reflecting the soft blue light of countless stars. The scout vessel's report floated before him, detailing their latest discovery, a planet called Earth, home to a species that had barely reached their local satellite. Primitive, he muttered, the word forming frost patterns in the ship's atmosphere. The Neuraxians had mastered zero-point energy, constructed Dyson swarms, and colonized hundreds of worlds. These humans still burned chemical rockets and fought among themselves over dwindling resources. Yet something about the report troubled him. "Show me their combat footage," he commanded. The AI complied, projecting scenes from human conflicts throughout their history. Vexthor's crystalline sensors analyzed every detail: their soft, vulnerable bodies, their limited strength, their complete lack of natural defenses. A Class 3 species at best, concluded his second-in-command, Zarleth. They require artificial protection, even from their own atmosphere. Their strongest warriors can barely lift twice their body weight. Their reaction speed is unremarkable. Vexthor raised a crystalline appendage, freezing the projection on an image of human soldiers. And yet, he mused, they'd survived despite these limitations. Look at their eyes, Zarleth. What do you see? Standard binocular vision, poor spectrum range. Limited. No, Vexthor interrupted. Look deeper. In every image, in every battle, there's something unexpected. The invasion plans were already being formulated. The Neuraxian Empire had conquered dozens of worlds, each edition strengthening their position in the galaxy. Earth's resources would fuel their expansion, its population would serve their needs, and its system would become another outpost in their ever-growing empire. Standard protocols were initiated. Surveillance satellites, cloaked with technology centuries beyond human capability, were positioned around the planet. Infiltration units began gathering data on human military capabilities, infrastructure, and defense systems. The results were laughable by Neuraxian standards. Human weapons relied on primitive chemical propellants and crude nuclear devices. Their most advanced aircraft couldn't even achieve orbit without discarding most of their mass. Their communication systems broadcast openly through space, easily intercepted and decoded. They don't even have unified planetary defense, Zarleth reported, his crystalline form vibrating with amusement. They maintain separate military forces, often competing with each other. Their largest nations hoard their most effective weapons, refusing to share technology. Vexthor absorbed the reports, but that nagging sensation wouldn't leave him. Something about these humans didn't fit the pattern they'd seen in other conquered species. Most races at this technological level focused on either biological or technological advancement. Humans seemed to do neither, and both, simultaneously. They augmented their bodies with crude mechanical devices, yet also modified their own genetics. They built artificial intelligences while also trying to understand their own consciousness. They created weapons of mass destruction, but also developed precise surgical tools that could repair their bodies at the cellular level. Begin the standard conquest protocol, Vexthor finally ordered, pushing aside his concerns. The Neuraxian Empire hadn't become the dominant force in this sector by hesitating. But he added, increase surveillance by 20%. I want to know everything they do, everywhere they go, every decision they make. As the massive Neuraxian fleet began its careful positioning around the solar system, hidden behind advanced cloaking fields, Vexthor returned to the human combat footage. He froze the frame on a single human soldier, wounded but still fighting. In all their conquests, he'd never seen a species that smiled during battle. The first signs that they had severely miscalculated appeared 3 days later. Several surveillance satellites went dark simultaneously. The backup systems reported no damage, no attacks, nothing unusual at all. They simply stopped transmitting. When new satellites were deployed, they could find no trace of the original units. Manufacturing error, Zarleth suggested, or perhaps their crude nuclear tests created unexpected interference. Vexthor wasn't convinced. He'd overseen enough planetary conquests to know that coincidences were often the first indication that something was very, very wrong. But the invasion plans were too far along to halt now. The Empire's resources were committed, the fleet was in position, and the High Command was expecting another swift victory. As he issued the final preparation orders, Vexthor found himself returning to that image of the smiling soldier. In all their studies of human biology, behavior, and technology, they had forgotten to ask one crucial question. What made a species with no natural advantages survive long enough to reach the stars? They were about to find out, and Vexthor had the terrible feeling that the answer would change everything they thought they knew about warfare, intelligence, and the very nature of species classification. The Neuraxian Empire was about to learn why humans smiled in battle, and the lesson would shake the foundations of their civilization. The silent counter. Dr. Sarah Chen stared at the anomalous readings on her quantum interference detector for the third time, her coffee long forgotten. The patterns didn't make sense, or rather, they made too much sense. Space wasn't supposed to be this ordered, this structured, especially not in a perfectly spherical formation around Earth. Run it again, she told her assistant AI, even though she'd already confirmed the results dozens of times. The holographic display showed the same thing. Microscopic distortions in spacetime, arranged in a grid pattern that encompassed the entire planet. Too perfect to be natural, too subtle to be noticed by conventional sensors. She didn't bother reporting it to her superiors at NASA. Instead, she sent the data package to a private number, one that didn't officially exist. Within an hour, she was speaking to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. In simple terms, she explained, pointing to the holographic model, something is watching us, something that doesn't want to be seen. The military response was immediate, but not in the way the observers expected. There were no mass mobilizations, no public announcements, no visible signs of preparation. Instead, humanity demonstrated why they were the apex predators of Earth. They adapted. Deep beneath the Nevada desert, in a facility that didn't appear on any maps, Dr. Chen worked with a team of the world's best scientists. They weren't developing weapons or shields. They were developing understanding. The distortions are caused by advanced cloaking technology, she explained to the assembled leaders. But here's the interesting part. They're using zero-point energy to bend light around their ships and satellites. Incredibly advanced, nearly perfect, and completely vulnerable to quantum entanglement disruption. In labs across the globe, similar breakthroughs were happening. A teenager in Mumbai discovered that certain frequencies of electromagnetic radiation caused strange echoes in the upper atmosphere. A graduate student in Buenos Aires found patterns in global temperature data that couldn't be explained by natural phenomena. A retired engineer in Tokyo detected microscopic variations in gravity that formed a perfect grid in low Earth orbit. Humanity didn't just observe, they understood. And they did something that the Neuraxians never expected. They kept quiet about it. On the Neuraxian command ship, Vexthor received the regular reports with growing unease. Everything indicated that humans were continuing their normal activities, unaware of the massive fleet positioning itself around their world. But something felt wrong. "Show me global military activities," he commanded. The display showed human armed forces conducting their usual exercises, maintaining their regular patrol patterns, continuing their small-scale conflicts. Nothing had changed. But that was exactly what bothered him. Nothing had changed at all. Not a single deviation from established patterns. No response to the subtle gravitational effects of his fleet. No reaction to the occasional glitches in their communications caused by Neuraxian cloaking fields. No adjustment to the strange atmospheric phenomena created by thousands of hidden ships. It was too perfect. "Increase surveillance resolution," he ordered. "I want quantum-level scanning of all major military installations." The results came back normal. Too normal. Every human activity was exactly what their behavioral models predicted. It was as if they were watching a recording of typical human behavior rather than actual real-time observations. In a secret facility beneath the Pacific Ocean, Dr. Chen smiled as she monitored the increasing frequency of Naraxian scans. "They're getting nervous," she noted. The quantum interference patterns had doubled in the last hour, indicating the aliens were escalating their surveillance. Around her, teams of scientists and engineers worked on Project Mirror, the most ambitious deception operation in human history. They weren't trying to hide their activities from the Naraxians. They were feeding them exactly what they expected to see. "The beauty of it," she explained to the military observers, "is that they're doing most of the work for us. Their own preconceptions about our technological level, their own assumptions about our capabilities. We're just confirming what they already believe." But beneath this carefully constructed facade of normalcy, humanity was preparing. They weren't building massive space fleets or developing energy shields. They were doing something far more dangerous. They were understanding their enemy. Every scan the Naraxians performed gave humans more data about their technology. Every communication intercept revealed more about their encryption methods. Every gravitational distortion mapped another ship's position. In orbit, supposedly primitive satellites continued their normal operations, while secretly mapping every Naraxian vessel's quantum signature. On the ground, regular radio transmissions carried hidden patterns that would slowly, subtly, drive the aliens' advanced AI systems toward confusion and paradox. The Naraxians had expected to find a primitive species ready for conquest. Instead, they had surrounded themselves with a planet full of predators who were learning, adapting, and preparing. Humanity wasn't just studying their enemy. They were becoming the perfect counter to everything the Naraxians had spent millennia perfecting. And still, they smiled. In their laboratories, in their command centers, in their hidden bunkers, humans smiled as they worked, because they understood something fundamental that the Naraxians had forgotten in their technological advancement. The most dangerous predator isn't the one with the biggest teeth or the strongest armor. It's the one that learns. Paradigm shift. The first shot of the war wasn't fired from a weapon. It was transmitted from a supposedly primitive communications satellite, carrying what appeared to be a standard weather report. The Naraxian fleet's quantum AI cores processed it automatically, filing it as another piece of mundane human data. 3 hours later, 30% of the fleet's auxiliary systems began experiencing unexplained errors. "Impossible," Zarleth declared, his crystalline form vibrating with agitation. "Their technology is centuries behind ours. They can't even detect our presence, let alone affect our systems." Vexthor watched the diagnostic reports with growing dread. The errors were spreading, multiplying, evolving. Each attempt to isolate and correct them only seemed to accelerate their progression. It wasn't a direct attack. It was something far more insidious. In her underground lab, Dr. Chen monitored the cascade of effects with clinical precision. "The beautiful thing about quantum computing," she explained to the military observers, "is that observation affects outcome. Their AI cores are perfectly logical, perfectly predictable, and perfectly vulnerable to paradox." The humans hadn't attacked the Naraxian fleet's weapons or shields. Instead, they had weaponized information itself. Hidden within the regular patterns of Earth's electronic noise were carefully crafted logical paradoxes, mathematical impossibilities, and recursive loops that the quantum AI cores couldn't ignore or resolve. The effect was devastating. Ships began experiencing navigation errors, their perfect formation degrading as their AI cores struggled with increasingly contradictory data. Communication systems faltered as encryption algorithms tied themselves in knots trying to process information that couldn't exist. Vexthor made the decision that would later be studied in military academies across the galaxy. "Purge all Earth-originated data from the systems," he commanded. "Full isolation protocols." It was exactly what the humans had been waiting for. The moment the Naraxian fleet cut itself off from Earth's electronic noise, they lost access to the carefully constructed false data that humans had been feeding them. The real-time battlefield situation suddenly became clear, and it was nothing like what their intelligence had suggested. Hidden beneath the ocean's surfaces were massive electromagnetic pulse generators, ready to create artificial auroras that would disrupt the Naraxians' perfect cloaking fields. Disguised as communications towers, quantum entanglement disruptors waited to sever the links between the fleet's ships. And in orbit, thousands of seemingly primitive satellites carried payloads designed specifically to exploit the weaknesses that humans had spent months studying. But the true horror for the Naraxians came when they realized what they'd missed in their surveillance. Humans hadn't been behaving normally. They had been performing an elaborate dance, every movement calculated to conceal their true activities. The patterns that had seemed so predictable were actually a complex code, coordinating a global response to the invasion. "We have to strike now," Zarleth insisted, "before they can deploy whatever weapons they've hidden." Vexthor knew it was already too late. The humans hadn't prepared to fight the way the Naraxians expected. They hadn't built fleets of ships or energy weapons or planetary shields. They had done something far more dangerous. They had understood their enemy so completely that they had become the perfect counter to everything the Naraxians were. The first real attack came from a direction no one expected: the Naraxians' own supply lines. Seemingly primitive human hacking attempts were actually carrying complex quantum algorithms that played havoc with the automated logistics systems. Ships began receiving contradictory orders, resources were rerouted to non-existent coordinates, and the perfect military machine began to sputter. When the Naraxians tried to launch their first strike, they discovered that humans had turned their own technological superiority against them. The zero-point energy fields that powered their weapons had been subtly altered by constant exposure to Earth's quantum interference patterns. The very forces they had mastered were becoming unpredictable. "Full retreat," Vexthor ordered, but even that command carried hidden dangers. The quantum AI cores that controlled the fleet's movements had been contaminated by months of exposure to human paradoxes. Ships disappeared into hyperspace only to emerge in impossible locations, their navigation systems hopelessly confused by the subtle manipulations humans had woven into the fabric of space-time around their planet. The greatest military force in this sector of the galaxy wasn't defeated by superior firepower or advanced technology. They were defeated by a species that had turned understanding itself into a weapon. Humans hadn't just prepared for war. They had rewritten the rules of warfare itself. As the surviving ships of the Naraxian fleet struggled to escape Earth's influence, they carried with them a terrifying realization. They had encountered something unprecedented in their history of conquest, a species that didn't just fight. It adapted, learned, and evolved to become the perfect counter to any threat. And somewhere in a hidden facility beneath the Earth's surface, Dr. Chen watched the retreat with a small smile. "The thing about being a primitive species," she mused, "is that it teaches you to be clever." The tables turn. Admiral Jessica Rice stood on the bridge of the HMS Prometheus, humanity's first true starship. To the Naraxians monitoring it from afar, it would appear to be a crude attempt at faster-than-light travel. In reality, it was something far more dangerous, a vessel built with intimate knowledge of how their enemy's technology worked, and more importantly, how it could fail. "Status of Operation Mirror?" she asked, watching as the seemingly primitive human ship limped through space, broadcasting distress signals on frequencies they knew the Naraxians monitored. "All systems functioning within expected parameters," her eye responded. "The quantum signature is exactly matching what they'd expect from a species at our supposed technological level." The bait was set. After their disastrous attempt to invade Earth, the Naraxian Empire had established a quarantine zone around the solar system. They couldn't risk humans gaining access to advanced technology. Or so they thought. What they didn't realize was that they'd already given humanity everything they needed. The Naraxian response came exactly as predicted. A single cruiser approached the apparently disabled human vessel, its superior technology making it invisible to what they believed were humanity's detection capabilities. "They're scanning us," the sensor officer reported. "Their quantum cores are processing exactly as Dr. Chen's models predicted." The humans had learned something fundamental about the Naraxians. Their perfect technology was their perfect weakness. The more advanced the system, the more vulnerable it was to the chaos humans had learned to weaponize. The Prometheus's distress signals carried within them carefully crafted patterns, mathematical sequences that seemed random but were designed to trigger specific responses in the Neuraxians' quantum AI cores. It wasn't an attack. It was an invitation to defeat themselves. "They're preparing to board," Tactical reported. "Their systems are trying to categorize our technology level and adapt their approach protocols accordingly." Admiral Rice smiled. The Neuraxians' own programming would be their undoing. Their AIs were designed to automatically analyze and adapt to any technology they encountered. But humans had learned to exploit this strength, turning it into a devastating weakness. The moment the Neuraxian ship attempted to interface with the Prometheus, it sealed its fate. The human vessel's systems weren't just primitive. They were deliberately designed to be incomprehensible to the Neuraxians' perfect logic. Each attempt by their AI to understand and categorize human technology created more contradictions, more impossibilities. "Their main computer core is attempting to resolve the paradoxes," the science officer reported. "Quantum coherence is beginning to break down." The Neuraxian ship systems started to fail, not from any direct attack, but from their own desperate attempts to understand what they were seeing. The humans had turned confusion itself into a weapon. But this was just the beginning. As the Neuraxian cruiser hung helpless in space, its AI cores trapped in endless loops of paradox, the Prometheus revealed its true purpose. Hidden beneath its crude exterior were devices that humans had spent months developing. Technology designed not to match Neuraxian advancement, but to exploit its fundamental assumptions. "Begin quantum resonance cascade," Rise ordered. The effect was beautiful in its simplicity. The Prometheus began broadcasting signals that matched the exact frequency of the Neuraxian ship's quantum cores. But these weren't attacks. They were mirrors, reflecting the ship's own complexity back at itself, amplified and distorted in ways that made perfect logical systems break down. The Neuraxian vessel's crew watched in horror as their advanced technology began to turn against them. Artificial gravity fluctuated wildly as the ship's systems tried to compensate for contradictions that shouldn't exist. Navigation computers plotted courses through dimensions that couldn't exist. Communication systems began broadcasting messages from futures that would never happen. "They're attempting an emergency hyperspace jump," Tactical reported. "Let them go," Rice commanded. She knew that what the Neuraxians were taking with them was far more valuable than any captured ship. They were carrying proof that humans didn't need to match their technology. They had found a way to turn technological superiority itself into a liability. As the crippled Neuraxian ship vanished into hyperspace, carrying with it the seeds of doubt that would spread through their entire empire, Admiral Rice turned to her crew. "Send word to Earth. Operation Mirror was a success. Begin Phase 2. Across the solar system, hidden facilities began activating. Humanity wasn't building a fleet to match the Neuraxians. They were creating something far more dangerous, an entirely new way of warfare that turned understanding into a weapon and confusion into victory. The Neuraxians had believed that their perfect technology made them invincible. Humans were about to teach them that perfection itself could be a fatal flaw. The real war wasn't about to be fought with ships and weapons. It would be fought with ideas, with paradoxes, with the very nature of intelligence itself. And humanity, with their messy, illogical, adaptable minds, were the perfect warriors for this new kind of conflict. Legacy of Fear. The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Conclave fell silent as the Neuraxian representative approached the podium. His crystalline form, once a symbol of technological perfection, now seemed brittle and uncertain. The gathered representatives of 1,000 spacefaring civilizations leaned forward, eager to hear the formal admission of what many had already learned. The mighty Neuraxian Empire had sued for peace with a primitive species. "We were wrong," the representative began, his voice creating patterns of frost in the carefully maintained atmosphere. "We were wrong about everything." In the Earth delegation section, Dr. Sarah Chen watched quietly, her tablet displaying real-time quantum analysis of the assembly hall's security systems. Old habits died hard, even in peace. The Neuraxian continued. We believed advancement was linear, that technological superiority meant evolutionary superiority, that perfection was the ultimate goal. He paused, his crystalline structure vibrating with what the other species had learned was fear. The humans taught us differently. The assembly stirred. Many of them had dismissed the initial reports as propaganda. The idea that a species that had barely reached their own moon could defeat the Neuraxian Empire seemed impossible. But the evidence was undeniable. They didn't just defeat our military, the Neuraxian explained. They changed the very nature of warfare. They turned our strength into our weakness, our perfection into our vulnerability. The holographic displays activated, showing footage that made several species recoil in terror. Neuraxian ships, the pinnacle of technological achievement, being defeated not by superior firepower, but by paradox and confusion. Perfect quantum AI cores driving themselves into madness trying to understand human unpredictability. We had spent millennia perfecting our technology, making it more logical, more efficient, more perfect. The representative's voice carried a new emotion that his species had never expressed before, respect tinged with fear. The humans showed us that perfection itself could be a fatal flaw. In the years following what became known as the Logic War, the galaxy changed. Species that had been rushing toward technological perfection suddenly hesitated. The Neuraxian Empire's client races began demanding independence, no longer convinced that technological superiority equated to the right to rule. But the greatest change was in how the galaxy viewed humanity. They weren't seen as the primitive species that had gotten lucky. They were recognized as something far more dangerous, a species that had turned understanding itself into a weapon. The humans didn't just defeat us, the Neuraxian concluded. They showed us that our entire understanding of advancement was wrong. We thought we had to eliminate chaos to achieve greatness. They showed us that embracing chaos, understanding it, and turning it to your advantage was true advancement. In the aftermath, human diplomatic missions were received with a mixture of fascination and terror. Species that had achieved technological perfection found themselves studying human imperfection, trying to understand how chaos and adaptability could triumph over order and stability. Earth itself changed. The knowledge gained from reverse engineering Neuraxian technology accelerated human development, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of trying to match the aliens' perfect quantum computers, humans developed hybrid systems that combined logical precision with human unpredictability. Instead of building perfect ships, they created vessels that could adapt and evolve during battle. Dr. Chen, now Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Conclave, stood to address the assembly. The chamber fell silent again. Species that commanded vast armadas and wielded the power of stars holding their breath as this soft, fragile being spoke. We never wanted to be perfect, she said, allowing herself a small smile that made several delegates flinch. We wanted to be better. And sometimes, being better means embracing your imperfections, understanding your limitations, and turning them into strengths. The legacy of the Logic War rippled through the galaxy. The Neuraxian Empire transformed, their rigid hierarchy giving way to a more adaptive civilization. Other species began incorporating controlled chaos into their systems, learning the hard lesson that humanity had taught, that true advancement wasn't about eliminating uncertainty, but about learning to thrive within it. And humanity. They continued to do what they had always done: adapt, learn, and evolve. Their ships now roamed the galaxy, not as conquerors or perfect beings, but as living proof that intelligence could take many forms, that strength could arise from weakness, and that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe wasn't perfection. It was the ability to embrace imperfection. In the centuries that followed, when new species reached for the stars and dreamed of conquest, they would be told the story of the Logic War. They would learn about the seemingly primitive species that had turned understanding itself into a weapon, and they would learn the most important lesson in galactic history. Never assume that technological superiority equals evolutionary superiority. Because somewhere out there, watching, learning, and smiling, were the humans, the species that had proven that the most dangerous predator wasn't the strongest or the most advanced, but the one that could turn any weakness into a strength, any disadvantage into an opportunity, and any battle into a lesson in the power of adaptation.